You may have heard about the Federal Reserve Bank and believe that it was part of government. But we're going to talk about the Fed today with a special guest.
You're listening to Wealth Talks with Dr. Tom and John McPhee, bringing you the facts so you can thrive in life. We welcome Dr. Paul Cleveland back to the show. Those of you who follow the show regularly know that we talked with Dr. Cleveland back in February, right before the market started heading down. And for those of you who are new on the show, Dr. Paul Cleveland has a Ph.D. in economics at Texas A&M University. He started his career in 1985. He's a professor of economics and finance at Birmingham-Southern College, and he's an adjunct scholar at the Alabama Policy Institute, a part-time scholar at the Apologetics Resource Center, and he works with the Faith, Work, and Economics Institute as well. Welcome back to the show, Dr. Cleveland.
Thanks. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Hey, it's a pleasure to have you. You know, we talked about the Federal Reserve back in February and what they had been doing buying mortgages and creating, basically disturbing and disrupting the money supply in the nation. That has continued with the fallout that we're seeing from the coronavirus and everything. They're continued disturbing the money supply, and now they're even buying corporate bonds of 794 companies. They bought $8.7 billion of those bonds as of June 24th. How does that play into the whole system here?
Yeah, well, here's the deal. So you mentioned that the market started a downturn. Well, the path that the Federal Reserve has been on is to prop up financial markets and market security prices as much as they can. And so in order to do that, they started to buy up corporate bonds to keep interest rate flow and bond prices high. And so that's what they're doing there. They're talking about, and I think they meet today, and they're talking about starting to buy up stocks. Well, I mean, this is like grand larceny at a scale unimaginable, because the fact is, if I ask someone, well, where do you think they get the money from that to do that? Mm-hmm. You know, most people would maybe scratch their head. Well, they effectively just print it up. They don't do it. They get it out of nowhere. Or, the Federal Reserve is nothing but a large-scale counterfeiter. And,
a legal one.
Wouldn't it be great if I could have a printing press in my basement, print up hundreds, and I just go out and buy up securities? Well, it doesn't cost me anything except the cost of the paper and the ink, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And then I would have claims to at least, those are real claims to real assets at some point, but it didn't cost me anything to get it. So in all the process, I'd be buying this stuff up, driving prices of all that stuff up. And of course, people would begin to sell it to me. And at the end of the day, I own it. And then, when the values of the dollar just collapse, it's as if I've stolen it from every person who holds a dollar of any sort.
So, a lot of people that are listening here, Dr. Cleveland, probably don't even know what the Federal Reserve Bank is and how it started. And can you give us just a little brief history about how some really cartel got such power in the United States over our currency?
Oh, yeah. Well, this is, it began, the Fed was created in 1913, and it really is part and parcel of the progressive movement. And socialism was the intellectual touchstone, I think, gaining momentum in the academy in the late 19th century, or from the middle to the late 19th century. And so the progressives then were the socialists in America. Socialism would not have sold well in the United States, but progressive, that word itself, well, that has this connotation of, well, we're moving forward. People want to progress in their own, economic wherewithal. And so the progressives were really just underground socialists. Their huge success was in being able to get Woodrow Wilson elected. I mean, he was our first socialist president. He hated the Constitution, was going to undermine it, and of course, who wouldn't want to be, if you were a banker, who wouldn't want to be in the banking cartel?
Absolutely.
to monopolize money in banking. And now, so if you'll notice something about socialists, all socialists want to control money, but because that's the easiest way to steal from people.
Mm-hmm.
Is you don't have to have tax collectors or anything else. You just devalue the money by printing a bunch of it up,
mm-hmm.
and then buy whatever you want. So that's the whole path of socialism. That probably wouldn't have sold well either in the U.S., but a banking monopoly, and with socialist ties, now that sold pretty well to bankers who were behind the scenes and in the know. So Wilson was elected in 1912, and then the progressive policies enacted the very next year. Well, we got the 16th Amendment, the income tax. Mm-hmm. Well, progressive income tax was socialists love that.
Mm-hmm.
The easiest way to redistribute money from others to yourself. So they got that in. They gutted any state government's access to having a say in what went on in Washington, D.C., with the 17th Amendment that cut state legislatures out from choosing their own senators.
Mm-hmm.
And what that did is it opened the door for the federal government to begin an extortion racket. We take your money in the income tax, and you do what we say, or you don't get your money back. So these state-funded mandates.
Mm-hmm.
See, none of that could have ever happened. State legislatures simply would not have allowed it to happen. But once senators were elected by popular election, just like congressmen, it altered the power structures that be and cut states out.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Federal Reserve Act, which is centralized. It's owned by the banks, and so it's a government instituted banking monopoly in effect.
And so
and they can counterfeit money.
And so when they start buying all of this corporate bonds, and now you're saying maybe stocks, and they bought mortgages with this
mm-hmm.
fake money they're printing up, they're really in competition with us, with the common people
right.
in the United States. And it devalues the product that we're investing in with the hard-earned dollars that we make. Not only are the hard-earned dollars we make worth less because of the dilution that they've done. So what's the end result to this?
Well, eventually, financial markets collapse. I mean, you reach a point that you're going to hit hyperinflation. Now, this has been going on. I mean, this started with quantitative easing with Bernanke in 2008 and all of that went on there. And the monetary base went from, monetary base is the total value of the securities that the Fed bought up, basically.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that's really called high-powered money. Now, their base went from about $800 billion to over $4 trillion in a very short period of time.
Wow! And that was in 2008.
From 2008, and we went through several rounds of quantitative easing. It was in like a 3-4 year window.
Okay.
I mean, as long as Bernanke was in, we were on that path. And when Janet Yellen came in, she quit that. And she was trying, she took over a position of being painted into a corner and not knowing what to do. Now, ordinarily, banks hold, forever held virtually zero excess reserves. And the reason why it's called high-powered money is, so let's say they, this is it, they have a 10% reserve requirement. So it's a fractional reserve system. So they were free to lend out 90% of their deposits. So, you can do the math. There creates a money multiplier of 10 in the banking system. That is, every new deposit that the Fed creates in the system has the potential to create credit money 10 times that.
That's incredible.
And now that didn't happen, and the reason it didn't happen was because the Fed started paying the banks interest not to lend the money out. And so, this was a great deal for the banks, right? Because
certainly,
you were basically given deposits that you didn't create, and you're going to get interest on it, and you don't have to take any risk whatsoever. Hey,
yeah,
what a great deal this is.
And were those payments made with money that was just created out of thin air too, Dr. Cleveland?
Oh, well, of course, because basically, they're holding securities, but they're still holding mainly treasuries and other sorts of things. So, it's like, now some of what the Fed owned, because they were involved in the toxic asset repurchase plan, are worthless securities, never going to be paid back.
Sure.
Yeah.
And, but what do they care? It didn't cost them anything. Actually, they don't even need paper and ink. It's all a computer transaction, the cost is, how long does it take you to type in a number?
Wow.
So we're talking about millions, billions, and trillions of dollars. And I remember listening to one of your presentation lectures several years back, where you were talking about $1 million versus $1 billion, and how much you would have to spend since the time that John the Baptist walked the face of the earth. Can you just relate that to the audience here, so that we get an idea of what massive amounts of money is being talked about?
Sure. All right. So, the analogy I use is John the Baptist. If he decided that, living as God's prophet, wearing animal skins and eating locusts and honey was not his idea of high living, and started to consume $1 million of the world's resources every day, he would still be consuming today and would not have yet blown through $1 trillion. It would take 2,730 some odd years to blow through $1 trillion at $1 million a day. And our government is spending money like it just, $1 trillion, $1 trillion in stimulus relief. Oh yeah. Well, where are you going to get it? This is, and so they're throwing money around like it is, like what? It just grows on trees, doesn't it? Or grows in the Federal Reserve. And so with the most recent, with COVID, what has happened is, once again, if you look at that monetary base, it has spiked, and I'd have to go back and look at the exact figure, but it's up over another like $1.5 trillion at least.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where we are. Once again, although this is being isolated on the commercial bank's balance sheet, that is, excess reserves have jumped like that too. However, this time, I was just talking to my buddy, we're working on a paper, Magic Monetary Theory. A lot of money is getting out because our actual money supply now is growing at a rate of 100% per year.
Oh, my.
So that the reality there is, once this actually filters down and hits consumer goods markets, you're talking doubling prices.
Yeah, that's insane.
And if production is shutting down like it's been, I mean, how many businesses have just gone belly up now, never to return?
Mm-hmm.
For me, I know I've been doing business with a particular cleaners to get my clothes clean for years. I mean, I dealt business with them now for 30 years. And in terms of reopening, went by they're closed for good.
That's so sad.
That's sad.
Yeah. And it's the small businesses that are seeming to get hurt the worst because the Fed's not pumping artificial money into them.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So what are your what are your thoughts on the bailouts, or basically the stimulus package that the government is giving directly back to the citizens, the small businesses, and the special loans through the SBA and the PPP loans? Where's that money coming from? Is the Fed creating that as well?
Yeah, of course. Or one, I mean, it's where everything is done. The Treasury goes in debt, right? Mm-hmm. So they have to print up huge amounts of new debt that they sell off to get the money to pay. And then the Fed, they buy up a lot of that crap, as well as all kinds of other stuff. There you go.
So this reminds me back in the 70s when you'd see a brand new motorhome driving down the road with a bumper sticker on it that said, "I am spending my grandchildren's inheritance." I don't think it's our grandchildren's inheritance anymore, though. I think it's our own inheritance, our own estate that's being destroyed. I was reading Thomas Sowell this morning, and he said the first law of economics is scarcity. The first rule of politics is to ignore the first law of economics. And
yeah, that's a good line. I have another good one. He was being interviewed, and he said, we should really get rid of the Federal Reserve. And the guy who was interviewing, he said, well, what will we replace it with? And Sowell responded, well, if you remove a cancer, you don't ask what you're going to replace it
with. So the Federal Reserve is a cancer. That's a good analogy.
Yeah, it's a pernicious organization.
It's let's talk a little bit about the natural cycles of the market. If the Fed wasn't there, what would happen? Because they say they're the stabilizer of the market. They're here to keep, huge corrections from causing depressions and recessions. And yet, historically, and I think even Bernanke admitted that he was Fed was responsible for some of those. So, what happens without a Federal Reserve?
Well, without it, I mean, we've never really had free market banking in the United States, which has been part of the problem. But the thing about it is the Fed's not stopping the business cycle. In fact, they create it. Mm-hmm. Because what is happening is, you got to walk through it by creating money out of thin air and artificially lowering interest rates. On one side of the coin, it gives the perspective to businesses that capital investments are more valuable than they really are. Mm-hmm. And so they begin to borrow money, right, to invest in capital projects. On the other side of the coin, though, the resources to provide that capital can only come from one place, and that's savers. People who are actually postponing present consumption for some future purpose through savings. And our vehicles for accomplishing this all are involved in financial assets, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Now, so the artificial lowering of interest rates induces, in other words, this is like a price ceiling, a price control. The demanders want more of it than the suppliers are going to supply, and so you have a shortage. Mm-hmm. Now, in this case, the shortage is covered over for a long time because you can actually go get the loans.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
You can actually go get the money. The money's there. And so it doesn't show up like most shortages do immediately. And so you have, it's almost like we're going to let the good times roll for a period of time until economic reality hits.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to the future and you realize, well, there's not enough economic wherewithal to buy the products that this capital is producing.
And that's why we still
Does that
see
make sense?
It does, very much so.
That's why we see the building boom continuing to grow. I mean, there's so much construction everywhere here in the Las Vegas Valley, and we just made a trip to Oregon for a funeral. It's just going everywhere because the money's still flowing freely from the banks.
Right. But at some point, you know, and the longer they push off the day of reckoning, the worse it's going to get. Sometimes when I'm talking with my students, I say, well, okay, you're going to go out on a drinking binge. Oh, let the good times roll. Well, the longer they roll, the worse the next day is going to be.
Exactly.
You know, I mean.
Yeah, you can't avoid the hangover.
No, it's coming. And and this is the reality that we're facing now. It would have been much, much better for the U.S. economy if we'd have had our recession back in 2008.
So
much better.
You talk about savings, and a lot of places that create that secure savings is the bond market, insurance companies investing in bonds and whatnot. What is that going to do to the people that are saving today? What's going to happen down the road? How is that going to affect them now that the Fed is directly competing with them, buying the products that we're saving in?
Yeah, well, you better be careful of the kind of assets that you're interested in. One of the things that I've done is we're trying to invest in ourselves and invest in things that we're producing for people that I know people need and are going to want more of, namely, so in our business, we're going to invest in educational resources that people need to understand this.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about having really productive assets at the end of the day, and of course, all assets have to be financed. So you need to have some place to have real savings. That is, you've really postponed consumption, that you'll be able to make those purchases and do what you need to do.
Very good. So your business, by the way, boundarystone.org, isn't that right? I have the website right there.
That's correct.
And you have some great educational materials on there. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Sure. So what we've done is one of my mentors is Dr. Clarence Carson, and he was a historian. And anyway, he was building out the content for American history, economics, and American government for high schoolers.
Mm-hmm.
He got me to, he wanted to get a Western Civ book written. He didn't want to do it, so he got me to do it. That was the first book I wrote.
Okay.
So we have all this content. What we're doing now is we're trying to make it available to private schools and homeschoolers in easy to use format. So what we've done so far is with economics, it's in a 4th edition now, and it's paired with an online course that you can buy. Now, you can buy them separately, or you can just buy the book, or however you want to do it. It comes with a study guide for the student, and then if you want to have the online course, the course walks the student through the text and provides videos and all sorts of other information that's useful in getting a good education. So we have that for economics. We have it for government.
Wonderful.
And we're working on it. We're working on it now to do that for American history and eventually we'll do it for world history as well.
Wonderful.
That is awesome.
So those are some great resources. You can get those at boundarystone.org. Last week on the show, we were just talking with Rick Green, who's a well-known constitutional educator, and he was talking about one of the best things to do is to get educated about what's happening, so you know what to do to work against it, and that's so important. That's
where opportunity starts.
Yeah, sure, exactly. Because if you don't, and I've done a couple of popular books, The Great Utopian Delusion and Unmasking the Sacred Lies, that are, we try to make them fairly easy to read books so you can see what the political elite is doing, what their strategy is. So it's our Great Utopian Delusion. What I tell people is, if you don't want to read Saul Alinsky's horrible little book that's dedicated to Satan, we've got it for you, what their strategy is in the Great Utopian Delusion, and we did not dedicate our book to Satan. So
very good. That's kind of important.
Well, we've talked a lot about things that are kind of gloom and doom today, because that's what's happening in our society. But there's always a light at the end of the tunnel. There's always hope, and that hope becomes real through our faith and the values that we have. And you touched a little bit on what you're focusing on to do that. You have a word to our listeners about what they can do to spark that little piece of hope and have faith in the future?
Well, I would say, Tom, it all begins, of course, with your faith in Christ and your faith in Jesus. Because if you don't trust Jesus and you don't trust the Word of God, you really don't have anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I would absolutely, start there and become a scholar of the Bible first and foremost. That's fundamental. And then beyond that, there's, Tom and I, you and I had a mentor of ours. His name was Nelson Nash, and Nelson was a strong Christian believer, but he also came up with, I think, a very good strategy to protect yourselves through times that we're living through like this, and called the infinite banking strategy, and using participating whole life insurance to finance the things that you need. Because in order to build up value in those, you have to save. You must save.
Mm-hmm.
That you must postpone consumption from the present to the future. And so that's one way to really protect yourself, I think. And then to use that, and I think one of the best ways to use that is to invest in something that's going to produce a return.
Mm-hmm.
That if you can figure out ways of taking your savings and turn that into productive assets that are things that are going to produce things that other people want, generate a profit, then that's an excellent way to protect yourself against what the Federal Reserve and what the government's up to.
Wonderful. That's a good takeaway. And that's what we help people to do here at Life Benefits, is to maximize the money that you do save so that you can continue to use it, access it for those asset creating, producing, productive projects that will help you overcome and offset the negative effects of all the monetary policy, the inflation that's happening around us today. Thanks for sharing that.
Well, sure. Thank you again for being with us, Dr. Cleveland. We appreciate your time and your knowledge, wisdom. It's always a pleasure to talk, and hopefully we'll be able to get together face-to-face here before too long after all this craziness is gone.
Good. Yeah, that sounds great. Well, it's always good to talk with you too, John and Tom. Appreciate you guys.
Same here. You are listening to Wealth Talks, where we bring you the facts so you can thrive in life. Be sure to check out Dr. Paul Cleveland's website at boundarystone.org and get his wonderful educational materials. We'll be back here next week. Have a great week.